Welcome to Algebra with Jennifer. Today we're going to take a look at factor by grouping. The very first thing you always want to do when factoring is look for a greatest common factor. I see I have my A value is 6, my B value is -20, and the C value is 16. We want to think about, is there a greatest common factor between those three numbers? And yes, there is. 6 is divided by 2, 20 is divided by 2, and 16 is divided by 2. It is in fact the largest number that can be divided into each of those. So I'm going to go ahead and factor the 2 out first. Next up, I want to take a look at my A value, B value, and C value. I'm going to use the X method to organize my thoughts. The idea with grouping is that we're going to take this B, this center -10x, and I'm actually going to write it in as two different terms so that I can get 4 terms written up here. That will allow me to do grouping, and you'll see that in a second. I need to come up with those two numbers first. So we're going to think about what multiplies to A times C and adds to B. So A times C is 3 times 8, which is 24. Our B value is -10. So what multiplies to 24 and adds to -10? Well, let's think about our factors of 24 first. Let me write them out. These are all of the factors of 24. All the different ways that I can multiply to get to 24. Now we're going to look at these and say, what combination, which one of these pairs, can I add to -10? Well, I see 12 minus 2, right? 12 plus a -2 would be 24. I could also say 6 plus 4 is -10. Well, I have to think about which one I'm going to use. If 12 and 2, let's just think about that for a second. For 12 and 2 to add to -10, the 12 would have to be negative. But if I do a -12 times a +2, I actually get a -24. So it cannot be the 12 and the 2. Let's look at the 6 and the 4. So 6 and 4. Well, to multiply to come to a +24, these either both have to be positive or they both have to be negative. Well, to add to a -10, if I make both of them negative, -6 plus -4 equals -10. -6 times -4 is a +24. And these are the numbers that I'm trying to get to. So I know that my two magic numbers are -6 and -4. So now to factor by grouping, I'm going to rewrite this, and instead of -10x, I'm going to use these two numbers instead. So I would have y equals, there's my 2 that I factored out, 3x squared, and then instead of -10x, I'm going to write -6x minus 4x plus 8. Because see, -6x minus 4x is -10x. Or in other words, -6 minus 4. Add the opposite, there's your -10. So next up, let's go for the grouping part. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore this 2 right now. That'll be part of my final answer. I just want to focus on what's inside of the parentheses right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into 2 groups. So as you can see, I have these 2 terms, 3x squared and then -6x. And in this group, I have -4x and a +8. So let's just focus on this first group. I want to find the greatest common factor between these 2 numbers. Well, I see 3 goes into 6, and 3 goes into 3. So 3 is going to be my greatest common factor for the number. And here I have 1x here, and I have x and x here, x times x. So my greatest common factor with the variables is x. So 3x. That's my greatest common factor. I write it first. And then I'm going to take each one of these individually and divide. Well, 3 divided by 3 is 1, cancels out. X squared divided by x to the first is x. And then I have a minus. 6 divided by 3 is 2. X divided by x is 1, which it means it's just 1. I can always double check what I've done, right? I can multiply this back to see if I've gotten back to my original. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times negative 2 is negative 6x. Just a way you can always double check yourself. Now I'm going to go to the second group. So now I'm looking between these two. I want you to know that I want you to always take whatever that sign is. If it's a plus, it's a plus. If it's a minus, we're going to take the minus with us. So when I factor out my GCF, I'm going to take that minus with us, okay? Very important. So I'm going to factor out here. So I have a 4 and an 8. Well, 4 is the greatest common factor between 4 and 8. This does not have an x, so I cannot factor out an x like I did here. So now I'm going to write my GCF first, so minus 4. And then I'm going to do the division here. So negative 4x divided by negative 4 is just x. Positive 8 divided by negative 4 is negative 2. What I'd like you to take note of, do you see how these are exactly the same inside the parentheses? They have to be exactly the same for this to work. If you do this and these are different, you've either made a mistake, maybe your GCF wasn't the GCF, or it's not possible to factor by grouping. It's one of those two things. So I see that they're both the same, so I'm going to proceed. Next up, I'm going to now look at these two terms, and I'm going to ask myself, what is the greatest common factor between these two? Well, they both have an x minus 2 in the parentheses. So that is the greatest common factor, and I'm actually going to just divide it out, just like I did here, just like I did here. Same exact thing. The GCF is x minus 2. So that is, in fact, my first factor. Now, what's left? Well, when I divide these, those cancel. I'm left with a 3x. When I divide this, those cancel, and I'm left with a minus 4. But wait, don't forget about that 2 up here that we factored out. So I'm going to add that out to the front. I'm going to get my y equals. Look at that, factored by grouping. So now that we have this in factored form, right, we started with standard form, we factored by grouping, and now here's my factored form. If my instructions said solve, my next step would be to replace the y with 0, because remember, on the x-axis, the y is 0. And when we're solving, remember, we're looking for what are the x values where it crosses the x-axis. Those are your solutions. So these are my 3 factors. I'm going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve for the x. The first factor is 2. But it does not equal 0, so we're not going to consider it. My next factor is x minus 2, so I'll set that equal to 0 and solve. So x equals 2, which means it crosses the graph at x equals 2. My last factor is 3x minus 4. I'm going to also set that equal to 0. And now I'm going to solve for x. I would add the 4 to both sides, and then I would divide by the 3, so x equals 4/3, or 1 1/3, so it would be like right in here somewhere. So these are my 2 solutions to this quadratic function. So I could say x equals 4/3 and 2, or I could write them as coordinates. I could say 4/3, 0, and 2, 0. So this is how you go from standard form into factored form by using the grouping method. Then we took out one more step to see what the x values are to solve this quadratic equation. I hope this helped, and thank you for watching.